Thank you, Ed. I thought you were going to give me a brief introduction, saying, here's a professor from Ames. Just to tell you that I've been in Cornell now for 2.5 years, and I think this is the best job I've had. It's been enormous fun. About 2 years ago, I came to talk to all of you, and I was talking about my vision for the Tata-Cornell program. And oh, you can't hear me, okay. I was trying to avoid this, but I guess I need it. Okay, 2 years ago, I came to give a CIIFAD seminar, my first CIIFAD seminar, where I was talking about my vision for the Tata-Cornell program. And now I'm delighted to be back doing another CIIFAD seminar, and I'm delighted to tell you that we've made enormous progress with this program, and I'm happy to share with you the work that we've been doing and look forward to discussions with you. To just get started, the Tata-Cornell Initiative on Agriculture and Nutrition is an initiative that was made possible by a very generous endowment that was given to Cornell University from Mr. Ratan Tata. Those of you who may know, Mr. Tata is a billionaire in India and a big industrialist, and he's an alumni of Cornell. And we've been delighted to have that endowment from him, and I've been honored to be the founding director of the Tata-Cornell program, which is a long-term research program that's addressing the problem of malnutrition in India and trying to look at what's the role of agriculture and other sectors in addressing the problem of malnutrition. So why India? Well, the reason for India is not just because the gift came from an Indian philanthropist, but also because India is such a big outlier in the area of malnutrition. India is seen as an emerging economy, it's seen as a modernizing economy. We do see significant drops in poverty levels taking place, although still high levels of poverty in the country. But the malnutrition numbers seem to be stubbornly high, and we don't seem to be able to shake those malnutrition numbers. Women's malnutrition, anemia levels are among the highest in the world. Child malnutrition is among the highest in the world. Vitamin A deficiency. In all of these factors, whenever people talk about health problems around the world, they keep adding the phrase, and the epicenter is India. And we want to see a future where the epicenter is no longer India. And that's what we've been really pushing for in this program. So one of the earliest things that we did when we started this program was we said the whole issue of malnutrition is a multisectoral problem. And agriculture has a role in this, but agriculture is one of many other sectors that's involved in this. And we need to get a clear idea of what are the pathways to addressing malnutrition. And if you think about maternal and child malnutrition, then what are the pathways through which we can improve maternal and child nutrition? And so our program actually looks at it both in terms of food and access to food, and in terms of individual nutrition, which is different from just having enough food to eat. And so our program is essentially divided into 4 broad components. The first area is around household food supply and household incomes. And here we look at the role of increasing agriculture productivity, increasing food productivity, improving incomes through agriculture, and their contributions to food demand and food consumption, etc. But it also looks at labor and the role of agriculture labor, especially women labor, and how that has a direct effect on women's ability to raise children, women's own nutrition capacity, etc., etc. So bringing that link together is important. The second component looks at diversity of food, quality of food. We all know that getting an adequate amount of food is important, but what's also important is that that food needs to have balance in terms of nutrients, micronutrients, protein, calories, all coming together. And without the balanced diet, we won't be able to make much progress on overall nutrition status. And here our focus is essentially looking at how do you enhance micronutrient access and micronutrient supply at the household level and at the individual level. Then the third component of our program looks at intra-household allocation of food. We know that in many countries, India in particular, you can have an adequate amount of food at the household level with enough diversity of food at the household level, but significant inequity in access to food among the members of the household, particularly for women and particularly for girl child in the household. And figuring out mechanisms to change that behavior is an important strategy for addressing malnutrition. And here we're looking at empowerment of women, behavior change communications, etc., that need to be in place in order to make progress here. And the final component is around absorption of the food and conversion of that into nutrients in the body. And we all know that you can eat an adequate amount of food, but your body's ability to convert that to nutrients depends a lot on overall health factors. It depends on access to clean water, access to sanitation, sanitary environment, etc. And that's a crucial part of the overall puzzle in the malnutrition story in India. And that's something we'll be talking about also today. So these are the big programmatic areas that our program is looking at. And in terms of actual components of work that we do, our program is broken up into 4 broad areas. The first big area is on better data and better metrics. There's a lot of discussion around malnutrition, but the data is terrible. We still are talking about stunting data for India that's come from the NFHS survey, which was done in 2006. We don't have adequate district level data on any of the nutrition parameters that we're interested in. So getting better data, better metrics, and better analytics is an important part of what we should be doing and what we're looking at. The second is action research on the ground, taking up issues and saying, bringing new technologies from Cornell, bringing new paradigms, and actually testing them on the ground. Doing field-based research and showing that these systems can work, and I'll talk about that. The third area is policy analysis and advocacy. There's a lot of information that's being generated here and elsewhere in the world, but the disconnect between what's generated and what translates into policy reform is very large. And what we're trying to do is figure out mechanisms by which we can bridge that gap and improve the overall policy work in both agriculture and in nutrition. And finally, capacity building. There's a lot that needs to be done in building better capacity in India on this nexus between agriculture and nutrition. There are a lot of good agriculture scientists. There are a lot of good nutritionists. But bringing these groups together to focus on the issue of maternal and child malnutrition is a major problem, and that needs to be addressed. So what I'll do today is go through very briefly on each of these elements. And what I'm going to do is give you snapshots of work we are doing. And You can ask me more details, but the talk itself will be just snapshots. So first on better data and better metrics. We spend a lot of time arguing about the relative importance of agriculture in addressing nutrition. There are a lot of people who think agriculture plays a very big role. There are also a lot of people who think it plays a very marginal role. Now, the only way you can address this problem is if you have data that has both agriculture and nutrition components in the same data set. That's easier said than done. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is promote a minimum set of nutrition data that can be included in agriculture surveys. And that's been a passion that I've had from the moment that I've taken on this program. And what's the minimum set of information that we need? We need module one, you need the anthropometric data. You need data on heights and weights and ages of every single family member. It's incredible that most agriculture data sets don't have that information. And without that information, we cannot make any nutrition inferences. And so that's one part of what's needed. A second minimum data that you need is what are people eating. Most agriculture data sets give you lots of information on what's produced, but very little information on what people are eating. And here we are trying methods by which we can have rapid assessments of simple diets, of diet scores, rather than actual quantities of food consumed, and we'll be talking about that. We've been doing, some of our Ph.D. students, Soumya Gupta in particular, who just finished her Ph.D., our first coming out of this program, has spent a lot of time working on biochemical markers, looking at simple ways in which you can measure anemia levels, vitamin A levels, etc., in rural populations. And then she's also been looking at intra-household allocation of food and mechanisms by which you can track intra-household allocation of food. And this final area on childhood care in the first 1,000 days is one that we still haven't worked on, and it's necessary to bring in to the data, but probably more context specific and may not be necessary in every single agriculture survey. So I want to talk a little bit about the work we did on the diet diversity surveys. And this work was done by our summer interns who were working with ICRISAT in India the last 2 summers. And rather than explain the work myself, what I'm going to do is let my interns explain it directly, if I can get this to work. This bouncing here. Can you see it at the back?
India today is home to nearly 1/7 of the world's population, with incredible diversity and complexity. Despite recent advancements in agricultural production and economic growth fueled by the expanding middle class, India still suffers from high rates of malnutrition, hunger, and poverty. Since the majority of rural households in India depend on small plots of land and traditional markets for food and income, there are strong links between agricultural development and nutrition outcomes. Understanding these links and collecting this kind of data, however, is often challenging, time-consuming, and extremely difficult to standardize. There is a need for tools capable of identifying the minimum amount of nutritional information necessary to understand these links all over the world.
So with this in mind, we at the Tata-Cornell Agriculture and Nutrition Initiative set out to design the minimum nutrition data set for agriculture. A set of survey tools capable of capturing the most essential dietary information in a simple, time-efficient method that can be included in existing agricultural surveys.
Beginning with the dietary diversity and food access model, a good group of Cornell student interns was assembled to work at ICRSAT, one of TCi's partner institutions, in Hyderabad, Telangana. To achieve our goal of developing a simple, efficient dietary diversity tool, we targeted 4 villages: Gokul and Ronapalli in Telangana, and Kanzada and Kinka in Maharashtra, for household survey. Our surveys were designed with women aged 18 to 45 responsible for cooking as the household representatives, and respondents were asked about everything that they and their family had eaten over the last 3 days in the 3-day recall method. Additionally, we held focus group discussions, cross-checked our information, and made observations about local markets. By collecting this information and assigning dietary diversity scores based on food groups defined by the Food and Agriculture Organization, we were interested in seeing how our results compared to specific nutritional survey data collected by ICRSAT in the same household. If the results were similar, then the dietary diversity survey could be used as a simple and accessible tool for researchers from all backgrounds to evaluate levels of nutrition and dietary diversity. Although further research is currently underway to narrow in on our conclusions, preliminary comparisons have yielded hopeful results, and we think that this tool shows a lot of promise for future research methods in agricultural development with nutritional outcomes in India and abroad.
That video was made by our summer intern students, and John Miller here was the inspiration in helping them design and make this video. It was a wonderful piece of work that came out. So what resulted from that is a module that's now being tested in various agriculture surveys, and we're trying to incorporate this into the regular survey work that ICRSAT is doing for their agriculture surveys. We've also tested to see whether the module that our summer interns came up with got data that was consistent with the very intensive nutrition surveys that ICRSAT was doing. And we find that in general, if you look at means of diet diversity, we find very similar results coming in, but this module actually allows you to capture much broader set of diet diversity than the intensive surveys that are currently being done. Now, one can look at diet diversity at a household level, but the bigger challenge is how do you look at a national food system and say, is there adequate amount of diversity in the food system itself? Is there adequate amount of micronutrients in the food supply system itself? And that's an important question because it relates back to agricultural R&D priorities. Priorities for biofortification, priorities for fortification work, etc. So Julia Felice, who was a postdoctoral fellow in our program, went through and did a very detailed assessment of the entire food supply system of India. So what she did was to take all of the data on all foods that were produced in the country, all foods that's imported, net of food that's exported, and then went and for each of those foods did a detailed characterization of the nutrient composition, which is not as easy as it sounds because most nutrient composition tables are done at a global level or at a regional level. But most soil scientists will know that the nutrient composition in a particular food depends a lot on the local soils and the local environment, etc. So you need much more localized nutrient composition tables. And she managed to pull together a set of nutrient composition tables for India and then worked with the Indian foods and broke the Indian population down by age and sex, etc., and assessed what's the demographically weighted need for the population and what's the demographically weighted supply, and then came out with sufficiency ratios for each of the major foods. And so here we are, the results that come out of that work. The results that come out of that work show that if you just think about the macronutrients in terms of calories and protein, well, India's been doing quite well. We're not talking about distribution, but in average, macronutrient availability is quite sufficient. Fats are a problem, but that's been improving over time. Now look at micronutrients. If you look at micronutrients, it's a very different story. If you look at micronutrients, zinc is just barely sufficient for the population, and the iron is just under sufficiency levels. But there's a real story around iron. The iron that's available through vegetable products is not as easily bioavailable as iron that comes from meat and livestock-based products. And the meat-based iron is actually very small. And that's where the big change has to take place. And look at the vitamin A levels. Vitamin A continues to be extremely insufficient at the national food system level. And despite the very significant shortfall in vitamin A sufficiency, you don't find as much a push taking place on biofortification or any other programs that address vitamin A. Much of the biofortification work in India is today focused on zinc and iron, which is fine, but things like golden rice, which was such an important strategy for addressing vitamin A deficiency, hasn't even gotten off the ground, and I don't think it's going to get off the ground in the near future. And that's a big challenge, and that's where we're bringing our policy work along with this data to try and influence agricultural R&D priorities at the country level. Here's some more of that data showing you which food groups are influencing the various micronutrients. And as you can see, much of the boost in vitamin A is going to come from livestock and livestock meat and other dairy products, etc. And livestock research and livestock development activities are among the weakest that we have anywhere in the world in India. And that's a big challenge to move forward on that. Now the second issue, as you think about diversity of the food system, then we need to say, as you try to promote diversity of food supply, where do you do it? Which regions of the country should we be looking at in terms of promoting more diverse supply system? One of our students, Hilary Byerly, did a very detailed spatial analysis, and there are several maps of the work that she's been doing that are up on our website, and I'll just show you two of them. These maps, I'm not sure you can see it clearly from the back. David, can you? These maps actually show you what's been happening to cropping systems since the 1960s to today. And what you see happening to cropping systems predictably is that rice wheat systems took over and moved pulses and coarse grain cereals out of many of the major agriculture producing areas, particularly looking at the Indo-Gangetic Plain and looking across the eastern seaboard areas. And that's been a big change between the 60s and the 2000s. You also see that oil seeds are coming in as a major sector in central India. And the cotton belt has taken off with BT cotton coming in. Now the big loser in this game, the big loser in the game has been pulses and millets. Millets are a very strong source of micronutrients and iron, and millets have completely lost out as the Green Revolution proceeded. How much did they lose out? If you compare between the 60s and the 2000s, there's around 650,000 hectares less than there was prior to the Green Revolution. Now some people have argued that productivity of millets has gone up and pulses has gone up. But the reality is, if you look at the actual productivity data, productivity has been stagnant for these crops. Now vegetables, on the other hand, has seen an increase in overall area, but but the increase in overall productivity of vegetables is still very low relative to the growth and demand for vegetables in India today, with income growth and with the need for diet diversity, etc. So what we're doing with this sort of spatial analysis is using this in our discussions to talk about what are the priorities for agriculture policy in India. There's at least a dozen such maps that are available on our website, and I welcome you to go and look at them. Another area in terms of metrics is using the better data and the metrics to do better analysis. And the issue of analysis is a lot of people, when we talk about nutrition and individual nutrition improvement, a lot of comments that come to us are, well, nutrition is multi-sectoral, and we have a limited budget. Where should I put my money in order to improve overall nutrition? What's the biggest bang that I have for my buck? And when I gave this seminar in the World Bank, that question came up every 10 minutes. And so we said, okay, let's try to quantify this. So Tanvi Rao, who is a Ph.D. student in our program, and I have been working on econometrically teasing out the various components in this framework that I presented earlier, and try to show the relative importance of each of the 4 quadrants, and within the quadrants, the relative importance of the various components in it. I'm not going to go through the detailed discussion of this. On November 6th, we have a full seminar in the Dyson School where we'll go through and provide a very detailed presentation on the econometric results. But just to say that the end product that we're looking for is to be able to tell you the returns to investments in each of these areas and how they impact overall nutritional status of women, and measured here in terms of BMI of women. Let me come now to the action research work. And this is an exciting part of what we've been doing, because what this program does is we try to be as field-oriented as we can be, rather than do most of our work with data and analysis sitting here in Ithaca. And one of the first activities that took off literally from day one is the work of the Agua Clara program, the work that Munro Webersheng and his team has started. This is Mason Sharif. Mason Sharif graduated from Cornell with a degree in engineering, water engineering. And she spent the last 2.5 years living in Ranchi in India. And she has built these water systems in 4 villages in India. What this system does is it pumps water using solar power from a well, takes it up to the top of this tank, and in that tank there is a sand filter, and following the sand filter there's a chemical doser, and the water goes to the sand filter and the chemical doser, gets purified, and then is piped in to individual houses within the village. And every household pays 60 rupees a month in order to access 3 hours of clean drinking water. And how clean is the water? This is the WHO standard for cleanliness and of the drinking water. And every one of our samples were better than the WHO standard. And so in the village in Jharkhand, I can drink the water and feel perfectly safe relative to the bottled water that I carry into the village. This is pretty amazing. And this technology is all Cornell design technology. It's now operational in 4 villages in India, and we are hoping it can be scaled up. One of our students, Shuli Vanajab, spent the summer in these villages, and she tried to figure out the time savings by having piped drinking water in your house. the time savings are mind-boggling. Goes down more than 3 hours to half an hour. And Shuli is going back to those villages to do her PhD work, and she's going to track not just time savings, but what happens to health, what happens to child rearing behavior, what happens to other household activities, and how do women spend this time that's been released for them? That's a really important question, and it leads to improved empowerment of these women. We have another project starting in Gujarat, where we're looking at ways in which you can fortify flour with micronutrients. Most often what happens is that some donor will come in, provide you fortificant, and an NGO will mix the flour and with the fortificant and give it out for free. And when the donor stops funding it, everything stops. What we're trying to do is create a market mechanism by which women's self-help groups in the village start to sell sachets of the micronutrients and provide training and behavior change workshops, encouraging women in the villages to actually come out and buy these sachets and to use them. And if that can happen, then that changes everything. That allows us to move out of the project and leave a sustainable market-based system in place. That's the hypothesis. So we're working with a group of partners, including CIIFAD, which is part of DSM, a big chemical company, that's provided us 1 million of these sachets for free for the first round. And with those sachets, these women's group are selling them at 3 rupees per sachet and building up a corpus. And with that corpus, they can go back to the company and buy new sachets as they come up. And the micronutrients that are there are iron, folic acid, vitamin A, and vitamin B12. And we'll be tracking the changes. Right now, we've gone through the approval phase. We're starting up the awareness generation piece, and then we'll be starting implementation by early next year. And we'll be tracking changes in nutrition, changes in overall health, but also looking at whether this market mechanism will actually work. And that's an exciting piece for another PhD student coming in. Now, last time when I gave this seminar, Harold said, where is soils in all this? And so, Harold, here we are, soils, very much center of what we're doing. We believe soil health leads to better human health, right? It's that direct connection between soils and plants and all of that, but it also is a conduit of bringing micronutrients into the food. And so soil health is a really important part of what we should be doing. And here's Harold and Phil Frost. Phil is Harold's student. Phil is from Zimbabwe and a farmer and doing a PhD now. And there's Phil digging away. And when Phil is in the field actually doing field work, he generates a huge crowd of onlookers. And basically what they're trying to do is figure out ways to characterize soil health and look at mechanisms by which one can improve overall soil productivity, look at ways in which you can bring simple tools to do measurements of soil health in the field itself, to be able to provide that information directly to farmers and educate them right there on the ground. And then eventually my dream is to connect this information to an advisory service. That farmers can call up an advisory service and say, this is the information that I have on my soil health card. What should I do? And someone on the other end of the line being able to provide them information. Harold, I hope I got that right. One area that I would like to see more work on and we've not been able to do much on yet is the whole issue of behavior change communication. There's a lot of work going on behavior change communication, but not something that's scalable, that seems to have strong impacts. And this is an area that I'd really love to get some advice on where to go and identify people who would be happy to work with us on this. Let me come to the issue of policy analysis. One of the things that we find very quickly when you're in this space of agriculture and nutrition is that agriculture policy tends to be highly disconnected from nutrition outcomes. Agriculture policy is basically focused on, do you have enough rice and wheat and maize in the food supply system? It's very much that green revolution paradigm. But it doesn't go beyond that to saying, how do we create a diversified food supply system that brings in all the nutrition requirements for the population? And that's been a huge challenge. And whenever there's a food crisis, you go back to your fundamentals, increase the amount of rice and wheat. And when we talk about models projecting into the future with climate change or anything, we say, what's the impact on rice and wheat and maize? No one says, what's the impact on tomatoes or cabbages or spinach or eggs or milk? And unless you get to a point where you think about the food system as more than just the fundamental staples, you're running into a problem of, that's a story I have to tell you in a little bit later. But anyway, you're going to run into this problem of being very focused on just the staples, okay? And I'm going to come back and tell you what we're doing on that. But first, I have to tell you about Soumya Gupta's work. Soumya Gupta was our first Ph.D. student. She graduated last summer. And her Ph.D. was very much focused on women's empowerment. Is there a connection between women's empowerment and better nutrition outcomes? And is there a relationship between the farming systems, the switch from being subsistence food crop systems to more cash crop oriented systems? Will you see a change in empowerment status? And Soumya Gupta in her research finds that yes, it's true that women's empowerment has a strong link to nutrition, and yes, as you go to more commercialized production systems, women tend to get more empowered as they have more cash in the house and be able to make better decisions on what foods to purchase, etc. Another PhD student sitting right here, Tanvi Rao, has just finished her 1 year in the field. So all of our students spend a year in the field doing field work, and she's been looking at how youth move out of rural areas and what's the process by which they can access education and skill training programs, their aspirations and what type of work they want to go into, looking at what kind of educational programs that they have a demand for, what are the constraints in getting to these programs, etc. It's an enormously important piece of work that fits into our program in looking at ways in which you generate income outside of agriculture that then feeds back into nutrition improvement at the household level. And this is the story I was telling you about, which is the agriculture policy story. And the issue on agriculture policy is this whole issue of staple grain fundamentalism. And one of the papers that I just published in Food Security addresses this problem directly by saying, unless we get agriculture policy to think about food security as being more than just the staple grains, we're not going to address the fundamental problem of malnutrition in India. And we need to get there, and that's going to be a big challenge because it's a paradigm shift for policy thinkers. But it's also a political economy problem. The people who are providing you rice and wheat that go into the government procurement system and the government food stocks are not going to sit back quietly while you make the change. They're going to vote you out of office, etc. So that's going to be a big political economy challenge moving forward. But I think eventually you need to get to a paradigm of crop neutral intensification. crop neutral intensification being where you promote productivity growth at the farm level without necessarily promoting a particular crop. So you provide all the infrastructure necessary for farmers to choose what's the best crop or livestock that they want to focus on. And that's where the level playing field in policy support comes in. But it also requires infrastructure investments, local market development, etc. And this is a big challenge, and my paper goes through that in great detail. As I wind up, I think I'll just take 2 more minutes here. Capacity building is a big part of what we're doing. And capacity building in terms of our own Ph.D. students, our summer interns, etc., is very important, and that's the core of our work. But we've also been doing joint courses in India. We've had 2 courses in India looking at food and agriculture policy. Harold and Phil are going to do, and Peter Hobbs is here, are going to do a course on soils this winter. We're probably going back this summer to do a course on impact evaluation. The demand for courses, short courses in India is enormous. And what we're trying to do is find courses that can target graduate students in India as well as Indian faculty to be able to benefit from some of the thinking that's going on here at Cornell. So as I wrap up, we have a very small staff here, and Jessica is here, Megan is here, and we have Bhaskar Mitra, who sits in Mumbai. He's our associate director. And we run this operation with this very small staff. We have a really good advisory board with Pep and Stop Anderson as the chair of the board. And we have faculty fellows who've been giving their time guiding graduate students, etc. Harold is one of them. But we've got several faculty fellows, and I think the opportunity for expanding that list is very high. And right now we've got 10 PhD students enrolled in the program, 1 who's just completed. And as you can see, the students come in, they go through their pre-fieldwork phase of 2 years of coursework, during which they spend the summers in India. Then they go through and spend 1 year in India doing their field work, and then they're back right up and they're out with a degree. We hope this entire process is 4 years. At least our funding stops at 4 years. And then the summer interns are a group that includes people outside of the PhDs. We normally advertise the program in December or so. And then we've got postdoctoral fellows, Matthew, Abraham is here, Asha Sharma, and Padmaja came from ICRISAT to spend some time with us, and Roger Liu from China has also been part of our visiting scientist program. Here's a shot of our team. As you can see, we are very diverse, gender-wise, nationality-wise, age-wise, and also height-wise. Very diverse team, and a diverse set of partners that we work with in India. And you can see more of our work on our websites. We have a really strong blog that many of our students keep blogging on, and you can follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
They eat a lot in the morning, eat a lot at night, but they won't have like that, or put a tax on it. Something basically led to price of rice increasing. And so people were protesting, and she said you should eat more vegetables, and people were so outraged and like thought it was hilarious that she said that, that they would greet her with like garlands of vegetables in West Bengal. So I was wondering, if you mentioned that like on the politics side of it, it's like the policy makers are focusing on stable-breeding fundamentalism, but I imagine a lot of it is also like habits.
There's a lot of behavior change needed. The question was, you need a lot of behavior change in order to get people to appreciate that you need to diversify your diets, and how do you get beyond the politics to make that behavior change. And I think I agree, that's a really important part of what needs to happen, and it has to start at the top. And you know, when the last Prime Minister said malnutrition is totally unacceptable, then everybody started to talk about malnutrition. You need people at that level who talk about diet diversity, etc. And that's something we need to see. On the lunch question, I don't have an answer to that. We'll have to check that. Rebecca.
First, I want to congratulate you on all that great progress since your last seminar. It's really exciting to see that.
Thank you.
Secondly, to inquire, like, but I very much agree with the issue of clean water being in the nutrient absorption utilization, but I'm curious about if you're doing anything in mycotoxins. And thirdly, I wanted to maybe contest your term crop neutral intensification. That seems too backed off. Like, shouldn't it be more agroecological if your concerns include soil, sustainability, and nutrition? It seems like if you take more aggressively agroecological intensification approach, you might achieve all those things in a way that crop neutrality seems
right.
unlikely to.
I said crop neutrality in the sense of moving away from the fundamentalism. But more proactively, one needs to think about a different word. Agroecology brings connotations that one worries about. but on the mycotoxins, yes, I'm interested. I want a student from you to work on it, and we should talk. Pilar.
It was not clear for me if you are working with Ph.D. students, helping form them in India, or all your students are from here.
Well, the students are here, but of the 10 students that we have, 6 are from India, but 4 are not Indian, right? So we are not an Indian student program. We are a program focused on India, and we welcome students from everywhere as long as they're focused on India.
As long as the connections with the local universities or that will be
and that we will
of capacity.
And that'll be part of what we do. We'll be linking the students to local universities, local partners, and in the process working on building capacity at the local level. Great.
I've learned from the experience of Harold. You mentioned soils last time. Okay, I want to mention resources and get it into your program. I'm thinking, for example, just the linkage of the resources, say forests to fuel wood,
yeah.
to fuel and substitution for animal manures to soils, those types of links or things like that, and also thinking about ag intensification. So how come you're not addressing resource issues?
So I would like to introduce you to Maureen Valentine. She is on her way to India this December or January, and one of the things she's going to look at is the conflict between grazing versus forestry in northern India, specifically looking at small ruminants, goats in particular, and saying how as you try to increase goat herds and all that, you're entering this conflict, and what do you do about that? But I take your point. There's a lot we have to do, and I'm happy to talk some more about that. Yeah.
That we're talking about malnutrition. A lot of it also comes from urban areas like urban poverty and the slums, and it can have its roots in the rural part of the country where the migrants actually come from. So, but the solutions for decreasing malnutrition in urban areas could be very different from those in the rural areas.
Exactly, and that's true, but we as a program have decided to focus just on rural areas. there's only so much we can go with our money, so we have to focus somewhere.
I guess I should have asked Maureen when I talked to her a few weeks ago, but it seems like a big opportunity for your crop control strategy to not scare away people that like staples. Is routing more of the nutrients and the byproducts through animals, and also a positive aspect of interacting with open land is bringing micronutrients home.
Right.
In other words, unlike dumb Americans, they don't leave their animals out all night. They bring them home, and so it seems like that, an intensive study of gathering micronutrients from deep-rooted woody plants, gathering micronutrients from a large area and bringing them home, as well as byproduct. That could
That's
be
an important point. Yeah.
It'd be neat to measure and model that.
Yeah, definitely. Maureen, you need to connect that. Last question, and then we're done. I've got 3, so whoever wants to volunteer to give up. Let me just go with the first lady here.
Hi, you mentioned about the ability to absorb nutrients from clear, clean water, and also something about access to toilets. Is that something that's also in the works for future programs?
But
The safety of women and the impact it'll have on gender and in the villages.
for the toilets? So some work that Tanvi Rao has done shows that just building the toilet itself isn't going to help you too much, because you can have the toilet sitting there, and there's been a lot of toilet building programs going on, and those toilets are not used as one would expect them to be. And so having the toilets but then adding a very strong behavior change communication program is crucial. And without that, it doesn't work. And I think that's why I come back to saying one of our weak points in our program is we don't have a strong behavior change communication component, and that's something I really want to see built up into that. So,
help me thank Professor Prabhu Pingali.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
With another class
Sure. Very nice. Oh, thanks. I don't know how to turn this off.
Yeah.